The Last of Us Part 1, the original game, is a great game about reliance, resilience, fatherhood, and what it means to reconnect to humanity. It's also one of my favourite games, if not, probably pieces of art of all time. I love this story. When I first played the game back in 2013, it hooked me immediately, but how? I can be really impatient when it comes to stories sometimes, especially ones told in the medium that I'm going to need to actively pay attention to for the entire time I'm consuming it. To put it simply, games really need to grip me like straight away for me to invest my time into it. Which sounds really pretentious, I know, but it's really just about me having a fucking dogshit attention span. For context, I'm not like an epic gamer. I like narrative games. I'm all about Red Dead Redemption, Assassin's Creed when it was still about Assassin's Creed, and every now and again I like to just load up Modern Warfare 2 and recite Soap's lines over and over, word for word. Ghost, cut the chart and stay frosty. I'm sorry, anyone from Scotland, I'm very sorry. From the first 20 minutes of The Last of Us, I understood the character, I understood where the protagonist needed to grow and learn, and I understood the thematic through line, or at least I had a pretty good idea of what sort of story I was about to be told. And that's because the game literally uses every tool in its arsenal within the opening to just set the stage for the next 10 hours or so of gameplay. It's not just a great opening to a game, it's the perfect segment that just tells you, I'm The Last of Us and this is what you're going to get yourself in for. And maybe that's why it has such an emotional resonance with people. You already know that you're going to be invested in this game because Naughty Dog just get in and get sad straight away. The game opens and Joel is arriving home late, having what seems to be a pretty intense conversation about the longevity of his work. Was he at work until now? Dude, it's like midnight. Go to bed. Sarah's asleep on the sofa but quickly wakes up and lets the audience know that it's still Joel's birthday and she has a gift for him. Throughout this entire interaction, we get the sense that Sarah is extremely independent for a girl of her age. Joel cares for her, that much is obvious, but he allows her to depend on herself way more than most parents would probably allow at this age. Her birthday card even affectionately states that Joel's never around. But despite that, he's a great dad. She's bought him an expensive watch without his knowledge, which even surprises Joel. He's clearly relaxed around her, accepting her excuse of selling hardcore drugs to pay for it.
Did you get the money for this?
Drugs. I sell hardcore drugs.
Oh, good. You started helping out with the mortgage then.
Obviously this is a joke, but the point is that he doesn't push for further information. He trusts her and allows her to make her decisions herself. He doesn't see the need to get involved. Joel doesn't get involved with his daughter's choices. Gee, I wonder if that idea is ever going to pop up again. Sarah wakes up in the middle of the night and her phone is going fucking mad. This takes us to the first piece of gameplay we're offered from Naughty Dog in the game, and it immediately pushes us into something we'd be pretty familiar with by the time the game's ending rolls around. That being walking around a house and opening a shit ton of drawers. From the get-go, we're searching for answers, looking for things to help. We get to explore Joel and Sarah's home as we hear TV reporters commenting on the developing situation in the city, and we find newspaper articles about the rising infection rate. That sounds familiar. The plot is gradually revealed to all those paying attention that some mad disease has been spreading and it's gradually growing out of control. Sarah's walking around, Joel's not around, and as she calls out for her dad a few times to no avail, we head downstairs only to be met with Joel steaming through the door, just sweating and stressing all over the place. I think it is important to note that Joel has left his daughter in the midst of all this. And yes, I know that he doesn't understand the weight of the situation yet, but still, he leaves Sarah. One dead zombie neighbor later, and Joel and Sarah are shaken to their core. Gone is the bravado of a child older than her years that Sarah previously presented to us, and now we're introduced to her as exactly what she is. A pretty fucking scared child. Seeing this, Joel reacts as any parent would. The time for joking is well and truly over, and his paternal instincts kick in so that he can ensure their well-being above all else. It's worth noting that as a player, we're already rationalizing our character's actions of gunning down a man, tossed up with the knowledge that we know this is the end of the world and it's deemed morally acceptable to do this. But Joel doesn't fucking know that. He's terrified. This neighbor guy was absolutely fine this morning, and now somehow he's dead on the floor in a pool of blood in Joel's house. This tough guy act from Joel, it's just that, it's an act. He's probably shitting himself right now, but staying tough is how he keeps his family alive, so he presents this front, which unbeknownst to him, will eventually end up becoming his default demeanor for the next 20 years, whilst he grapples with the fact that even his hardest exterior wasn't enough to save the person that he was closest to. Tommy pulls up. This is the first time that we see Tommy, but he was the guy blowing up Sarah's phone earlier, so we've already been somewhat introduced to him. Having been cut off earlier, he pulls up in his truck to get his brother and his niece out of the house and somewhere a bit more safe. At this point, Sarah is in a state of shock, like she's just seen her dad murder a man who was coming at them with the intensity of a dog with fucking rabies, so she's acting fairly quiet right about now. Joel is acting incredibly within the character that we'd know him to later become, already just dismissing Tommy's remarks, choosing instead to focus on the immediate threat and deal with problems as they arise, not try and figure out a broader scale of what could be going on and how can we help. And this next part is where we get some amazing character work. As we're driving, we see a family begging for help, two parents and a child all signaling for Tommy to pull over, which he instinctively does. He begins to slow down and Joel snarls back at him.
Keep driving, Tommy.
Stop!
This is the first crack in the foundation for these two brothers, foreshadowing their fundamental disconnect in perceiving survival and moral and ethical concerns. Tommy chooses to come to Joel to provide aid. Tommy chooses to slow down and see how he can help complete strangers, specifically because they have a young kid in their company. Joel, however, is unwilling to look outside of his immediate circle, opting to keep his group small and prioritize the people that he's closest to. It's a fucking selfish mindset, one that doesn't look towards protecting a people, but rather protecting his people, which is kind of fucking shitty, but Jesus, it's gonna bite him in the arse in a minute. One wrecked car later, Joel, Tommy and Sarah are on foot. Well, Joel and Tommy are. Sarah's been injured, so she's relying on her father to carry her to safety. Reluctantly, Joel has handed his gun to Tommy with only one instruction: to keep them safe. As they fight off the infected and navigate a minefield of panicked civilians, another theme of the game is clearly on show. Reliance in this world is crucial for survival. Whilst cornered, Tommy turns to Joel and beckons for him to leave. The logic of the situation dictates that someone is needed to hold the door back, and that by Tommy staying there alone, he allows Joel, who is slower due to carrying Sarah, more time to escape. This is a fucking risky technique, but in one line it clearly exemplifies the difference between the two brothers' ideologies.
Go! You got Sarah!
You've got Sarah. Oh, it's fucking cool shit, because Tommy prioritizes the future. Sarah is his family, of course, but this line works in service of Tommy's position on one of the game's ethical debates: sacrifice in order for survival. Tommy is choosing to potentially sacrifice himself, or at least put himself directly in harm's way, to protect the survival chances of his junior. When faced with a them or me choice, Tommy chooses them, something that later on in the game Joel would be completely unable to do, choosing instead to further his selfish intention and doom a potential future that theoretically would provide safety to the masses. Joel and Sarah arrive at the outskirts of the city, out of breath and struggling to escape, when they're stopped in their tracks by a soldier. Appearing as like a saving grace, the soldier fires rounds into the chasing infected, effectively saving Joel and Sarah and placing them in a much safer environment and scenario. Or so we thought. The soldier radios in and struggles with the order that he's given. We hear him plead with his commanding officer.
Sir, there's a little girl.
And Joel starts to twig on. At this point, you can see the panic in Joel's face rise as he goes over to the soldier and tells him that they've just been through fucking hell to get to where they are. He is desperate right now. Joel uses this time to plead with the soldier, but it's at this moment that the tables have truly turned on him. Remember that not just 10 minutes prior, Joel was completely fine with ignoring a father begging him for help. Of course, this being the opening of a zombie game, Sarah does die. His tough shell is completely broken away as he mourns his daughter, who was gunned down by a representative of an institution sworn to protect people like him and his family. If this opening achieves anything, it's the grand setting of the stage for our main character, the person we'd be taking control of for the next however many hours it is. Having lost his daughter completely needlessly at the hands of human ignorance, Joel shuts out his fellow man. He becomes reclusive and unwilling to open his heart to create any more meaningful connections. The following years he spent with Tommy and the 20 years we have between his in-game appearances are described as nightmarish.
I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it.
And focus solely on survival, ending in the inevitable fallout of the brothers, presumably because whilst Tommy's mindset evolved, Joel remained stuck in the past, unable to believe in a cause or place his hope in any community or group, specifically the imposed government-type authority that dictate law in the Boston quarantine zone. Tommy leaves him, presumably sick of Joel's aimlessly surviving way of life. He seeks purpose and desires to thrive in a community, which is something that Joel just can't be a part of at this moment in his life. Sure, Joel goes on to spend the rest of the game learning to open his heart to Ellie, to reconnect to a daughter figure in his life, but the scars of his past experiences remain. When the time comes for Joel to make the game's final choice, allowing Ellie to sacrifice her life, respecting her decision to provide a brighter tomorrow for humanity, Joel acts in his own self-interest because of the events of the opening, this specific scene. In a world at war with the infected, his daughter was killed needlessly despite his pleas, by a human, someone supposedly on Joel's side at this point. So why should he listen to the world when he's given a second chance? In that moment, Joel deems them unworthy of saving. He knows this is wrong. Everyone fucking knows this is wrong, surely. But to Joel, it's what he deserves. It's fair. Every part of this opening is so carefully crafted to serve the story we're about to be taken on. Tommy's decisions revolve around protecting a future generation, which we'd see later on in his joining the Firefly cause, leaving only to pursue his family life in a community that redefines what it means to live in a post-apocalyptic world. Joel spends the opening being trusting and reliant, and after losing his daughter, he becomes a shadow of his former self, committed to not opening up and actively dismissing any chance to achieve happiness in a world where he lets Sarah die. The only time that Joel does allow himself to open up is when he starts to become completely overbearing on Ellie, infringing on decisions that she makes and betraying her trust.
They've stopped looking for a cure. I'm taking this home.
This game is honestly fucking incredible. If there's any chance that you've been living under a rock and you haven't played it, then I'd really urge you to do so. It still stuns me that there was so much care put into the opening 20 minutes of this game, and if you think the opening is good, then fuck me. Somehow the rest is better. And I know there's a lot of people out there on the internet that disagree with the direction that Joel's character was taken in, but art is subjective. What people like is subjective. I like it. I think it's good. I think it's very cool.
Hole in one!
But anyway, that's me done talking about a game that's almost 10 years old. But yeah, give this video a little like if you liked it. That would be super cool. And thank you for watching. Take care.